Hello and welcome to episode 35 of Her Finance Talk. And my name is Sue Diamond and I'm your host. And our goal is to provide our listeners with inspiring and encouraging experiences by sharing the journeys and successes of other women with a variety of topics related to financial empowerment so you can create the life that you want to live. And thank you for joining us today and investing in your financial well-being. Her Finance Talk is brought to you by the Her Finance Club, and our mission is to socialize the idea that it's okay for women to talk about money because knowledge is power, and when that knowledge helps you become more independent, it translates to empowerment. Women empowering women is a mantra we love to live by, and one that has helped to inspire women decades. Where would we be without each other? So without further ado, joining us today is Andrea Ames. Hello, Andrea, and welcome.
Hello, Sue. Thanks so much for inviting me.
Oh, my pleasure. And Andrea is a former IBMer turned entrepreneur, and she shares her story of how she transformed from corporate employee money mindset to an entrepreneurial money mindset. After more than 35 years working in corporate, then transitioning into consulting with big businesses in product design and development, and then transitioning to working with small business and entrepreneurs. So Andrea has a lot to share with us. Her passion is supporting amazing humans to be wildly successful. And her partner in life, Doug, which my partner is Doug as well, describes what she does as helping people to help people better. I love it. And recently, a client called her the customer success Jedi. I love that too, to describe your ability to help clients create customer experiences that grow their businesses and generate more joy for themselves around their business. I just love that description. I would love to open up the conversation and have you expand on your story and just a little intro to that. When we initially spoke, you had shared with me and talked about your years with IBM and the successful career journey that you'd had. And then you talked a little bit about feeling uneasy despite having this dream job and making great money. Can you tell us more about your career with IBM and some of the highlights and challenges you experienced during that time that then led to the turning point in your career when you realized that something was missing despite having success and having your dream job?
Absolutely. So I think the hallmark of my years at IBM was really the moment when I got promoted to a level called senior technical staff member. And it's a level that your manager can't promote you to. It requires a committee and a dossier and a review and referral letters and all kinds of craziness. And I was the first person from my practice, which was technical content, to be promoted to that level. And once I got promoted to that level, there was more of an expectation. And frankly, I had a passion for building capability across my community within the company. And so I was trying to help more people progress in their careers and get promoted to that level and so on. And so, as you say, it really was my dream job. I, I absolutely loved it. And I would say about 2 years before I ended up leaving IBM, I just started to have this feeling of unease. And I took a month off, actually reduced time. I think I was working like a quarter time or something. And I joined a productivity program. And I thought, I'm just not productive enough. That's why I'm not feeling like I'm going where I should be going or progressing or succeeding the way I should be succeeding. I'm not sure even what my vision of what looked correct was at that point. I just knew I felt uncomfortable. So I spent a month and I took this productivity program and it was amazing for sure. I learned a lot. I got a lot more productive. I addressed some mindset issues and then I got back to work. And even though I was more productive and I was actually sharing more of my productivity tips and things with my team, I still felt uncomfortable. And I realized that I'd kind of topped out in my growth. I I really didn't have much more to grow in my particular job. I could keep doing what I was doing and even improving the way I was doing it and improving the things that I was doing, taking on new projects and so on. I mean, there was plenty to do, but it didn't feel like growth to me. And IBM moved my job geographically, and I did not want to move. And so I left the company and actually actually spent about 6 months looking for another job because in my family, my sort of lower middle class American culture, it was expected. You grew up, you went to college, you got a job, you climbed the ranks, I was going to say graduated, you retired with the gold watch, right?
Right.
And I was already in a generation where the gold watch retirement wasn't really a thing. Before I joined IBM, I probably kept a job for 2 or 3 years at the most. I was already in that generation of people, but I still kind of had that idea stuck in my head. That was retirement. You put money in your 401k, that's the way you made all your money. And so you bought a house. Those were your investments, right? 401k and your home. And so when I left IBM, I had looked for another job and realized none of those were going to satisfy what I felt would be growth for me in my career. And I thought, well, here's something I haven't really done is take on the full mantle of business ownership. That'll be growth, which is kind of an understatement. But I basically took the leap and I did it with a lot of savings. So I had a pretty good financial cushion. We had moved from California back to my home state of Maine. And so the cost of living is much, much lower here. So I was in a very good financial position to bail on a corporate, a very good paying corporate job and make nothing for a while and invest in a business. And yeah, so that's sort of the short story of kind of how I felt uncomfortable and how that ended up motivating me to leave. Oh, there's one other thing. So I left IBM in July, but in January, excuse me, in January, I watched a workshop on Creative Live with a guy named David Bach. And I had read his books. The uh, oh my gosh. Now his titles have gone right out of my head. But they're investment books. And they were things like how to invest so you'll own your home before you retire, like drip investing in buying small shares of small amounts of stock and so on, putting a little bit away each month and letting it build up and investing in your 401k and all that. And I had followed his advice. And by the time I left IBM, so I'd been in corporate for 35 years at that point, I had over $1 million in my 401k just from maxing out my 401k. That was like always my first rule. And I also had some other savings. But I watched this workshop and it was focused on people who maybe felt like it was too late for them to be able to catch up by just putting money into their 401k or whatever. And he talked about um, being in business for yourself is the best way to have control over your financial future. And he said this thing that really stuck with me. He said, let's say you make $100,000 a year and you make $5 million for your company, you're still going to make $100,000 a year. But let's say you make $100,000 a year and you make $5 million in your company. Well, you can make $1 million that year for your salary or 2 million or whatever, right? Depending on what your business overhead is and all that. But you have the opportunity to create money in your life by owning your own business. And I thought, yeah, like that's for me. I want to have, I didn't necessarily feel like I wanted to be a bajillionaire or anything, but I felt like that control was something I didn't even realize I wanted until I heard that, statement from him. And I was like, yeah, that's something I want. And I think that can help me get more freedom. And, in the productivity program, the people who ran it were obviously entrepreneurs, and they talked about freedom, being able to work from anywhere, only work 10 hours a week or whatever. And I was like, I don't really want that. I love my work. I want to work more, and I don't want to work from anywhere. I want to work from where I am.
Right.
I don't want to travel around. So to me, that was freedom. But what I realized is freedom is having agency. Freedom is having control to decide what freedom is for you and be able to afford that freedom, regardless of whether it costs $10 or $10 million. So yeah, that's kind of my story of leaving corporate.
Well, freedom is choice, isn't it?
Yes.
Because I would say it's not what you earn, it's what you do with your money, right?
Yes.
That allows
Yes.
you the freedom to make that choice. But I love just in terms of you sharing, creating money in your life with your own business, what often I see when I speak with clients when we talk about the transitioning, when you're working for somebody, you're exchanging time for money. That's
Yes.
basically what you're doing. Whereas when you work for yourself, you can look at, can I create passive incomes that allows me the freedom to work only 10 hours a week or 20 hours a week? And that makes a huge difference. And I know we'll talk a little more about this shortly, just in terms of mindset, because often what I'd see with women that I work with when they transition from being employed to working for themselves, it's very hard for them to move initially from that time exchange for money in terms of costing out. This is my value. This is my worth. I'm not charging you for a 30-minute one-to-one session. I'm charging you for the 30 years of experience that I'm bringing to that 30-minute session, which
Yes.
it's really hard and it's understandable because we go back to the whole mindset thing. I also come from, a generation where it was like do well in school so you can get into college. And when you graduate from college, you can go get a really good job because you'll have a degree and then you'll be in a steady job, earning a steady income so you can get a pension and retire. Uh, and of course,
Sounds like a lot of work to be
I don't know
old,
that.
right? I mean, that's kind of the people think, oh, you retire because you're old and you're too old to work anymore. It's like, wow, that sounds like a lot of work and then you're old. That sounds
Right,
horrible.
right. Again, it goes back to that mindset. And of course, as you know, I talk a lot about the money mindset, but it's across the board in terms of the results or the actions that we take are based on a lot of those verbal and nonverbal messages that we receive as we're growing up, which
Yes.
makes it more challenging for us to transition out of that mode as well.
Yeah,
I know.
I'll a couple things came to mind while you were talking. One is you were talking about time for money and actually the value of the 30, in my case, 35 years of experience I had. And it reminds me of something that one of my early business coaches said. He said, it's the story of the plumber, right? So the plumber shows up. He's the most expensive plumber in town. And he shows up and he listens to the pipes, taps on a few things. Then he pulls out a big wrench and he whacks once on the pipe and suddenly everything's perfect. And the person's like, well, why am I paying you $500? You worked like 5 minutes. And he's like, Yeah, because it's the 30 years of experience I had that knew exactly where to hit it, how hard to hit it, with what tool. It's not the amount of time that I spent. And so there's so much more value in that 5 minutes than somebody who might come and spend 5 hours and your basement's flooded and, your pipe's still not fixed.
Right.
So I always think about that. It's like not only my 35 years experience in corporate, but I also invest heavily in myself, and I absolutely think of it as an investment, not an expense, in getting myself educated and so on. So, and we can talk about that later. But the other thing, when you were talking about corporate mindset, this was probably the most sad realization that I had about corporate mindset. So I had been on my own for, I think, a year, and we went to my nephew's graduation from college. So he got a dual master's in physics and engineering, or engineering and computer science or something. He graduated with honors. I mean, he's a super smart kid. He had all these amazing ideas. So this is back in 2018 about deep learning and AI and a whole bunch of stuff. He's like, "Oh, well, you could do this or you could do that." Yeah, I think like I could create something that did something else. And I thought, Nick, you have no family, you don't have kids or a wife, you don't have a house where you have mortgage payments. You're in a perfect situation to take some of these ideas and see if you can make them grow, see if you can implement them, make money, and so on. And I said, come to Maine. Like your grandfather has a finished basement. Come live in the basement for nothing. Like, take advantage of where you are right now.
Right.
And he said to me, but what would I put on my resume from that time? So he wasn't thinking about, I could live a life where I never need a resume again. He was thinking about, this would be a waste of my time because I wouldn't be adding it to a resume so that I could get a job. And we had a long conversation about it and he didn't budge. And I walked away from that feeling like I helped instill some of that value system in him, that it was so important to get a good education, to get a good job, to build your resume and so on. And I thought, wow, I have done him like a huge disservice because he doesn't even see this as not only an option, but actually perhaps a better opportunity. So there's so much that goes into that mindset. And money, I think, is the outward manifestation of a lot of it because it's the thing that kind of shows up really realistically in your life.
Right. Just to take a step back to when you talk about the resume, and again, we know that we've just transitioned through COVID, the big resign, and a lot of women looking at, okay, I like working at home and I'd rather use the commuter time to be with my kids or do the things that I enjoy to create a stress free life. But often, in terms of transitioning into something else, it's so thinking, oh, I want to create a business or I want to go back to work. We often look at it's like a housekeeping list, right? A job description. Somebody writes it out, which nobody can ever meet 100% of it. It's like, where on earth do they come up with this? Especially the government stuff. It's like 3 pages long. We then look at this, and especially women. Ooh, I only meet 85 or 90% of this. I need to go back to college so I can learn the skill set to apply for the job. Or I've been out of work. What can I do? Well, especially when you have kids as well, it's like you're the CFO of the household. You're a project manager for getting them to all the different sports things. You can't pigeonhole yourself into your professional life. You have to tie all the different things that you do. These are all skills that you can
Yes,
bring to your own business or to somebody else that can help
absolutely.
achieve your or the mission. And again, it's that mindset thing. We tend to pigeonhole ourselves, right?
Absolutely.
One of the things that you had mentioned was that as you talked about the process in terms of what led to you wanting to leave the corporate world and that it was more than just business aspect. It's about becoming who you needed to be. How did you work through? There was one thing that you'd mentioned to me was confronting your fear of asking people for money and accepting your value as an entrepreneur.
Mm. Um, so yeah, I'll just say that in my time in corporate, I was very, very active in my industry, the community in my industry. So I taught at the University of California, Santa Cruz, was the program chair for a certificate program. I keynoted and spoke and gave workshops at industry conferences. So I was pretty well known. And I realized when I left corporate that I had been kind of giving it away, especially at these industry conferences and so on. People expected I would show up. Now, I wasn't really giving it away because people were paying to go to those conferences, but they weren't paying me. And IBM, and at the end, was subsidizing my ability to come and share my knowledge and teach workshops and so on. But I felt like I would go and sit in the bar at the end of the conference day and, you know, have a beer with all the people from my workshop and answer whatever questions they had and give them whatever advice I could and share resources and so on. And so I felt like I'd been giving it away, and it kind of messed with my ability to believe that they would pay me for the same information. That's what it felt like. I'm just doing the same exact thing. Now I'm asking them to pay me. And because I was very much a unicorn in my industry, so there were not a lot of people who had built the capability in a company the size of IBM and done the level of things that I had done.
Right.
In fact, very few who also had experience training people in leadership and so on, that I was quite unique. And so many people knew me that I had people saying, "Hey, you left IBM, like come and talk to me about possibly coming and working with my company." So, but I had a really hard time. So for the first year, I mostly stayed afloat with people who came to me because they knew me from before. And so that worked out okay, but I realized I did not want to continue exchanging time for money. So consulting is just more time for money. And I wanted to scale my business, not so much passively, but at least scale it with groups. So about a year later, I decided I want to start a group program. And that's when it really hit me. I like, I didn't want to make any offers. I withdrew. I didn't want to put myself out there on social media. I didn't want to like, how can people buy something from you if they don't even know it exists? I wouldn't even talk to people about what I was doing. And I joined, excuse me, I joined a group program, a coaching program, and showed up at a retreat, couple of 2, 3 day in-person event that the program had. And that was a lot about what we were talking about, was mindset, corporate mindset versus entrepreneurial mindset and so on. And I spent 3 days pretty steeped in what are all the limiting beliefs you're telling yourself about money, about your value, about how to make offers, ask people to buy from you or refer you or whatever. And so for me, it really took help. Like I got a bunch of leads on resources at that point. I started reading a lot of books. I kind of leaned into mindset work. I got another coach specifically to help me one on one with this person.
Right.
I had a therapist who was helping me with the feeling unsafe because I no longer had a monthly paycheck coming in.
Right.
Because I literally felt unsafe. I started kind of hoarding my money. I didn't want to spend any money because if I spent it, it wouldn't be there anymore. I had a real scarcity mindset. And I literally did not even recognize that I had a scarcity mindset until, of course, I looked back on all of that. But I'm going to say I didn't really get out of that. So I left my corporate job in July of 2017. I'm going to say I didn't really get out of that scarcity mindset until actually early 2020. So it was a long haul. It was a really long haul. And, I had heard people say during that time, well, going into business for yourself is basically it's therapy, right? It's not about business, it's about you. You'll spend 95% of your time working on yourself. And I was like, what does that even mean? And boy, did I learn in 3 years exactly what that meant. And I think that's, one of the biggest things that I tell, like, I have friends who are leaving corporate and so on, and it's like, be ready. Be ready to take a deep dive on your own beliefs about everything in the world and be ready to make changes to be successful as an entrepreneur because it's a deep dive coaching program on yourself.
Yeah. I say this all the time to women that I work with, that we don't realize that 95% of the decisions that we make are unconscious.
Yes. Oh my
So,
gosh,
and
yes.
it's, well, we don't have time to go into it now, but in terms of neuroscience and our brain going into this default mode, I always say, this is not your fault when you think about, I'm scared to do this, or I don't want to charge more money for this, or anything related to that. It really is back to, as you say, it's your money story, your mindset. I'm always saying that your beliefs create your thoughts, which in turn create your behaviors, which in turn create the results that you have
Yes.
with life.
Yes.
So it
And if you're not making offers, Sue, you don't make any money.
right,
It's funny how that works.
Andrea, this is wonderful information for our listeners
So glad.
today, especially anybody considering transitioning from corporate to becoming an entrepreneur. Do you have an offer that you would like to share with our listeners today?
I would love to. So for folks who are course creators, membership or mastermind leaders, mentors or coaches with group programs, I have a short 2-hour workshop that I would love to offer to your listeners. It's usually $19. I'd like to offer that at no charge, and I'd love to add a post workshop, what I call an accelerator session. So a 60-minute session to talk about how they can build on the results of the workshop to develop their onboarding strategy for their group program. Because I basically help folks with everything that happens after the sale. And so, that onboarding is like that crucial first impression that people can make with their clients and really hook them into their program from day one and keep them engaged and consuming their content and showing up for their live calls and so on.
Right. Oh, can I start?
Absolutely. You got it. You'll have the special URL with the built-in coupon code.
Well, I'm going to be sharing how our listeners can access your offer in the show notes. And do you just want to share verbally with our listeners, where can they find you?
The best place to find me is AndreaAmes.com, and all my social links are there. But I'm also Andrea Ames on LinkedIn, and I am Client Keeping Coach on Facebook.
Okay. Love it. Again, I'll share that information in the show notes so our listeners can access that. Thank you, Andrea, for sharing your story and your expertise. It's been a pleasure, and we really appreciate your time today.
Well, thank you so much, Sue. It's been a pleasure to be here, and I really hope that it helps someone who maybe is in the position I was in.
Okay, wonderful. As we close out, From my perspective, money is present in every aspect of our life. And as a result, focusing on the money side of economic literacy or financial capability is not necessarily going to improve your financial situation. So, you've heard from our discussion today self awareness and financial awareness are often tied in and required really to move forward in terms of success. So the more you understand the where, why, when, and how of your thoughts, feelings, beliefs, and attitudes, especially when it comes to money, the more likely you are to recognize the need for how you can improve on habits and make better choices. For those of you who are not familiar with me, I suggest that if you want to work on your thoughts and beliefs and influence action for success, you can access my book, The Money Belief Formula: Mindset plus Behavior Equals Financial Success. Transform your habits and win with well. That link will also be in the show notes. I just want to take the time to remind everybody today that Her Finance Talk is brought to you by the Her Finance Club, where we support financial feminism, which stands for financial inclusion and equality for women, not only relating to your earnings, but also to building and keeping wealth. And we have several resources to support you on your journey to wealth and abundance, and you'll find those links in the show notes. Don't forget to subscribe, and we love your feedback. Get your personal finance question answered or share a win with the community by leaving us a voicemail. You might get featured on Her Finance Talk. So until the next time, here's to your financial well-being. Thank you for joining us today. Bye.